They made her walk behind the carriage, until the king stopped the entire procession. Her grandmother used to say, "The road reveals who a person truly is. You need only watch how they walk it." Senna Vale had grown up hearing those words in a small stone cottage at the edge of Dunmore village, where the road was rutted mud in spring and frozen iron in winter, and where she had walked every inch of it barefoot before she owned a second pair of shoes. She understood the saying in her bones. The merchants who rode through Dunmore on their fine horses never looked down. The healers who came for the sick always dismounted. The soldiers never helped anyone off the ground they'd knocked over. The road revealed everything. She was 22 years old when she was given a place in the Aldrath noble household as a companion servant to Lady Meerith Aldrath, not chosen for her bloodline, which was nothing, or her wolf shift, which had never come, but for her reading voice, which Lady Meerith claimed was the only one that didn't put her to sleep. Senna had accepted the position with a careful kind of hope. It was a start, she told herself. A road forward. She kept her grandmother's saying tucked inside her chest like a folded letter, something to read when the world felt unreadable. She had no idea how soon she would need it. Chapter 1. The Procession of Rank. The Aldrath carriages were the color of old blood, deep lacquered crimson trimmed in brass, and they gleamed like something that wanted to be worshipped. There were 3 of them, lined up in Dunmore's Market Square on the morning of the Royal Assembly procession, when every noble family in the province of Vale was required to travel the King's Road to the capital city of Vale, presenting themselves in order of standing. Senna stood beside the second carriage with the other household servants, her small traveling pack on her back, a gray wool cloak that had belonged to her mother folded over one arm. The morning was cold and smelled of hay and axle grease. Around her, Lady Meerith's ladies-in-waiting arranged themselves in the first carriage with great ceremony, their gowns arranged just so, their perfume cutting the autumn air like something imported and expensive. Lord Casveth Aldrath, who was broad and red-faced and fond of the sound of his own voice, had decided, apparently this very morning, that the servants would not ride in the third carriage, as had always been the custom. "The third carriage carries my hunting dogs," he announced to no one in particular and everyone at once. "They require the space." Senna looked at the third carriage. The dogs inside looked comfortable. The dogs were, she estimated, taking up perhaps a third of the available bench space. Fenwick, the head steward, cleared his throat quietly. "My lord, the servants—" "We'll walk behind," Lord Casveth said, already turning away. "It's a procession, Fenwick, a display of station. The servants walking behind the household is entirely appropriate. It has historical precedent." Fenwick looked at the servants. There were 6 of them. Senna, who had no wolf shift, and therefore no enhanced stamina. Old Brem, who managed the household linens and was 63 years old. 2 young kitchen boys. A laundress named Odette. A groom named Pell. The King's Road from Dunmore to Vale was 42 miles. "My lord," Senna said. Lord Casveth turned slowly, as though the sound of her voice was a mildly interesting insult. He looked at her the way people often looked at her, as though he were cataloguing her deficiencies. No wolf, no family name, no beauty that commanded rooms. Just a pair of steady gray eyes and a cloak that had seen better decades. "My lord," she said again, keeping her voice even, "Brem cannot walk 42 miles. "Brem can ride on the supply cart at the back," Casveth said. "The rest of you are young. The walk will do you good." He got into the first carriage. The door shut with a sound like a gavel. Chapter 2. The First Miles. They set out when the market clock struck 7. The supply cart, carrying crates of wine, wrapped cheeses, the lord's hunting equipment, and now old Brem, who sat on a crate with the dignity of a displaced king, trailed at the very end of the procession. Senna walked with Odette and the 2 kitchen boys, Fen and Corwick, behind the Aldrath carriages. Pell walked slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back at them with guilty eyes. The King's Road south from Dunmore was beautiful in the way that things can be beautiful when they are not trying to kill you. Beech trees in full autumn fire lined both sides, their leaves burning gold and copper in the early light. The road itself was well-maintained royal stone, smoother than anything in Dunmore, and Senna might have found the walk pleasant under other circumstances. What was not pleasant was the carriage, not the motion of it, the exhaust of it. When Lord Casveth's lead carriage rolled, it threw a fine spray of road grit, dust and small stones and the general residue of a horse-drawn vehicle, backward onto whoever walked behind. After 20 minutes, Senna's gray cloak was peppered with it. After 40, Odette was coughing. After an hour, Fen had a small cut on his cheek from a kicked stone and was crying silently, trying not to let anyone see. Senna gave him the corner of her cloak to wipe his face. "It's just dust," she told him quietly. "Keep walking." But it wasn't just dust, and they both knew it. By the second hour, they had passed 2 other noble households, the Threvian family in green and gold, the Osmont family in pale blue, and in both cases every servant rode inside a carriage or on a cart bench. Several of them looked out their windows at the Aldrath walkers, with expressions ranging from pity to discomfort to careful blankness. Senna noted every face. The road revealed, she thought. It always did. Chapter 3. The King's Road. The Royal Assembly procession was not simply a journey. It was a tradition dating back 300 years, and as such, it had an audience. Villagers came out to watch from every settlement along the route. Children sat on fence posts. Farmers paused their work. Innkeepers stood in doorways. They were watching the display of rank, watching the show of prosperity. And so, they watched the Aldrath procession roll past in its blood-red glory. And then they watched 6 servants walking behind it in the road dust, including a young woman in a gray cloak who lifted her chin and walked as straight as though she were the one being honored. Senna knew they were watching. She refused to hunch. If she was to be made into a statement, she would make it herself. At the 3rd hour mark, they crossed the Vale Bridge, no relation to her name, she always had to clarify, over the River Seth, and Senna allowed herself to stop for exactly 3 minutes, tilting her face toward the water below, letting the mist cool the dust on her skin. Odette stopped beside her. "My feet," Odette said with the economy of someone who has run out of room for elaboration. "I know." Senna looked at the woman's shoes, soft indoor slippers, because Odette had been told she would be riding and had packed her walking boots in the luggage carriage. Luggage that was, of course, locked in the 3rd carriage with the dogs. Senna looked down at her own boots, which were sturdy and broken in. She looked at Odette's feet, which were the same size as hers. She unlaced her boots. "Don't." Odette shook her head. "You'll cut your feet. The road is royal stone for the next 6 miles. After that it goes to packed earth." Senna held out the boots. "I've walked worse barefoot." Odette took the boots with the expression of a person receiving a gift they feel guilty about wanting. They both knew she was right to take them. Senna walked the next 6 miles in her stockings. The stone was cold and smooth and entirely manageable. She told herself this. She mostly believed it. Chapter 4. King Erevan. The procession traveling north from Ethan Vale, the king returning from his own tour of the Eastern Territories, met the noble procession from Velsorath at the crossroads town of Mireth Hollow, exactly as protocol required. Senna heard him before she saw him. Not because he announced himself, because the whole road ahead went quiet in a particular way. A held-breath quiet, the kind that spreads from person to person like a stone dropped in still water. The noble carriages slowed, then stopped. She craned her neck. Ahead, through the gap between the 1st and 2nd Aldrath carriages, she could see the royal procession coming around the bend. Riders in silver and black, a banner bearing the wolf crest of the ruling house, and then, flanked by 2 mounted guards, a figure on a dark horse that stood very still in the middle of the road. King Erevan Sorath was younger than the portrait suggested. He was perhaps 30, lean in the way of people who do not sit still, with dark hair and a face that was currently wearing an expression Senna could not quite read from this distance. He was not looking at the noble carriages. He was looking at the road behind them. She understood a moment later that he was looking at her. Or, not only at her, at all of them. At the 6 people walking on foot in the dust behind 3 lacquered carriages, in a procession that was meant to be the province's most honorable display. He was taking in Odette's borrowed boots and Fenn's dust-caked face and the general spectacle of servants being made to perform someone else's dignity with their bodies. Lord Casveth's carriage door swung open. The Lord descended, straightening his coat, stepping forward with the particular swagger of a man who had not yet understood what he was walking into. "Your Majesty." Casveth bowed. "A privilege to meet you on the road." The king said nothing for a moment. His dark eyes moved from Casveth to the road, to the walkers, and back to Casveth with the slow precision of someone reading a text twice to be sure they've understood it correctly. "Whose household?" he said at last. "My own, Your Majesty. Aldrath of Dunmore." Casveth gestured, a broad, proud sweep. "An honor to present. Why are those people walking?" The question was not loud. It did not need to be. Chapter 5. What the Road Revealed. Lord Casveth's explanation was extensive. He spoke of the dogs, of historical precedent, of the tradition of displaying rank, of the servants' general good health, and the fineness of the weather. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned about anything he'd done in his own household, and therefore assumed that the first question would be the last. King Erevan listened to all of it. Then he turned his horse and walked it, slowly, the length of the Aldrath carriage line, until he stopped in front of Senna. She looked up at him. She had been looked down on from horseback many times in her life. She was practiced at not shrinking. He studied her for a moment, not the way Lord Casveth looked at her, cataloguing deficits, but the way her grandmother used to look at her across the cottage, like he was reading something real. He looked at the gray cloak. He looked at her bare feet in dusty stockings. Something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not pity. Something more like recognition. "Your name," he said. "Senna Vale, Your Majesty. Companion servant to Lady Miraith Aldrath." "Vile," his eyes flickered. "Like the bridge. No relation, Your Majesty." That surprised a brief, quiet thing from him that might, in a less formal context, have been a laugh. Then he looked at the road, at her feet, at the boots she was not wearing. "You gave your boots away." It was not a question. She did not deny it. "The laundress was in indoor shoes," Senna said. "The road is stone for the next 6 miles. I made a calculation. And the calculation did not include your own feet. Hers needed it more urgently." He was quiet. Then he turned back to Lord Casveth, and the quality of the silence changed entirely. The way air changes before a storm, not loudly, but unmistakably. "Lord Aldrath." The king's voice was measured, each word set down with intention. "You will remove your hunting dogs from the 3rd carriage. Your servants will ride. You will also find suitable boots for this woman before this procession moves another yard." He paused. "These are not requests." Lord Casveth had gone the color of old milk. "Your Majesty, surely—" "I have stated the matter." King Erevan looked out over the assembled noble procession. Dozens of carriages from every family in Velsorath, every window now occupied by a watching face. "The road is the king's road. Every person who walks it under my protection. I will not see any person made into furniture in a display that bears my name." There was a silence so complete that Senna could hear the river over the rise, moving fast with the autumn rain. Then Lord Casveth bowed very low and retreated to comply. Chapter 6. After the storm, it was Fenwick who found boots, a pair from Lady Miraith's own luggage, soft leather traveling boots trimmed in dark green, a size too large but padded with a wool insert, and infinitely preferable to cold stone. Lady Miraith herself had not protested. She had, in fact, been conspicuously invisible during the entire exchange, which told Senna something she filed away carefully. The dogs were moved. The servants loaded into the 3rd carriage. Brem, who had watched the entire confrontation from his crate on the supply cart with bright, sharp eyes, told Senna afterward that it was the finest thing he'd seen since the year a river flooded through Lord Casveth's prized hunting grounds and spoiled every last one of his game birds. Senna sat in the third carriage with Odette and the kitchen boys and watched the beech trees pass in gold and copper light and tried to sort out the jumble of things she was feeling. Grateful. Still a little stung. Something else, a warmth she did not entirely trust, located somewhere near her sternum, associated with the memory of dark eyes reading her face like something worth reading. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Kings noticed injustice because it was their duty. His intervention had been about his road, his procession, his name. It was not personal. She told herself this several times. Then the carriage slowed, and Fennec's face appeared at the window. "The king requests," Fennec said in the careful tone of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, "that Mistress Vale ride in the royal procession for the remainder of the journey. He wishes to discuss the province." Odette stared at Senna. Senna stared at Fennec. "He wishes to discuss the province," she repeated. "That is what he said." She smoothed her cloak, her gray, dusty mother's cloak, and got out of the carriage. Chapter 7. The King's Road to Ethan Vale. He rode beside her rather than ahead of her, which she had not expected. She had expected to be seated in some auxiliary carriage, perhaps, and consulted through a window. Instead, he had a second horse brought up, a calm dun mare with a white star, and they rode together at the rear of the royal procession, while his guard moved tactfully ahead, and the noble carriages continued south, and the beech trees went on burning gold in the long afternoon light. He asked about Dunmore first, what the harvests had been like, whether the road to the eastern mill was still broken at the third culvert, whether the dispute between the Tanners' Guild and the river rights holders had been resolved. She answered everything honestly and in detail, because she had lived in Dunmore for 22 years, and she had paid attention to it the way poor people pay attention to the things that determine whether they eat, which is to say, completely. He listened with his whole attention, occasionally asking follow-up questions that suggested he had been asking about Dunmore from other sources, and was now triangulating. "You're testing my account against something you already know," she said. He glanced at her. "Is that a problem?" "No. It means you care whether it's accurate, which is better than the alternative." He seemed to consider that for a moment, turning it over. Then, and she would remember this precisely, because it changed the entire texture of the conversation. "How long have you been in the Aldrath household?" 8 months. "Before that?" "My grandmother's cottage, the eastern edge of Dunmore." She paused. "She died in the spring." A beat. "I'm sorry." The simplicity of it caught her off guard. Not the formal condolences she'd been offered by Lady Miraith. How dreadful for you. She was quite old, wasn't she? But just, "I'm sorry," as if the loss were real and worth acknowledging. She used to say, Senna found herself saying, before she'd entirely decided to, that the road reveals who a person truly is. You need only watch how they walk it. He was quiet for a moment. The horses moved in easy rhythm. The trees threw long gold shadows across the road. "Your grandmother was perceptive," he said at last. "She was the most perceptive person I've ever known." Senna looked ahead at the road, at the way it curved south toward a city she'd never seen. She also said that most people choose to walk roads they've been told they belong on, rather than the ones they can actually see. "And you?" He looked at her. "Which kind of road do you choose?" She considered the question honestly. "I'm still deciding," she said, "but I've stopped standing still." He didn't answer immediately, but when she looked at him, his eyes were already on the road ahead, and he was, she thought, smiling. Chapter 8. Ethan Vale. The city came into view at dusk. A mass of warm lights built into the side of a cliff above the sea. Ethan Vale spreading upward along the rock in tiers of pale stone and dark wood. The royal citadel at its crown catching the last of the sunset, so it looked like it was on fire. Senna had never seen it. She stopped her horse without meaning to. Erevan stopped beside her. "First time," he said. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I remember what that looks like." He looked at the city the way she was looking at it, not with ownership, but with something like reverence. "I was 11 the first time I saw it from this road. My father brought me." She thought of asking about his father, but something in his voice folded the topic gently closed, and she left it. "It's beautiful," she said instead, simply and truly. "It becomes more complicated the longer you live in it." He looked at her, that direct reading look again, the one she was beginning to know. "But the view from this road never changes." The procession moved on. She moved with it. At the city gates, the noble households were received and assigned lodgings in the guest wards of the citadel. Senna assumed she would be lodged with the Aldrath servants, in whatever the servants' quarters were, and was already calculating how to make the next 3 days of the assembly tolerable. How to do her work for Lady Miriath without being near Lord Casveth. How to avoid the particular cruelty of being invisible in a beautiful place. Instead, Fenwick appeared again. The man was becoming a recurring herald in her life, with a note on royal paper. The note was brief. It said, "Mistress Vale is to be lodged in the eastern guest chambers as an invited guest of the crown, by order of King Erevan Sorath." Odette, reading over her shoulder, made a sound that was not words. Senna read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the pocket of her gray cloak, next to the small, smooth river stone she always carried, a piece of the Vale River from outside her grandmother's cottage, worn perfectly oval by the current, gray-white and cool. She went to the eastern guest chambers. Chapter 9. The Assembly. The next 3 days were the strangest of Senna's life, and she had lived some genuinely strange days. She attended assembly sessions, not as a servant, but as an observer seated in the gallery above the hall, where the king had arranged a chair and access to the written summaries of each session's business. He sent questions via a young clerk, wanting her perspective on the provincial concerns she'd raised. She answered in writing, carefully, honestly, sometimes at length. The clerk came back with follow-up questions. The exchanges had the quality of a conversation conducted in letters, and she found herself looking forward to each one with an intensity she was trying very hard to be sensible about. On the second evening, he found her in the Citadel's upper library. She had been given access, another bewildering gift, sitting in a window seat with a book about the province's water rights, which were genuinely interesting, and also a convenient excuse to be alone with her thoughts. "Water rights," he said. "The tanner's dispute I mentioned. I wanted to understand the underlying law." She turned the book so he could see the page. "Did you know the culvert legislation dates to your grandfather's reign, and was never updated for the expansion of the mill district?" He sat down. Not in a chair across the room, in the window seat, close enough that she could see the tiredness around his eyes from 3 days of assembly politics, and the way it lifted slightly when he looked at her. "I did know," he said. "I've been trying to get the council to address it for 2 years. What's the obstacle?" 3 lords who own the upstream rights and don't want them revisited." She thought about that. "Lord Casveth owns river frontage east of Dunmore," she said carefully. He looked at her. "Yes, I thought so." She set the book down. "He tends to sit very still when topics he benefits from come to a vote." A silence. Then, "Senna." Her name in his mouth, without the mistress. Just her name, the way her grandmother had said it, like it meant something specific and real. "Yes. When the assembly concludes," he said, "I would like to continue this conversation. Not here, not with a clerk in the middle. I would like—" He stopped. Tried again, more carefully. "I am asking if you would consider a position at court, a formal one. I need advisors who tell me the truth, and who know what the roads look like from the ground." She looked at him for a long moment. The library was quiet, full of the smell of old paper and the sea coming in through the window. "You could hire a surveyor," she said. "I don't want a surveyor." He met her eyes. "I want someone who gives their boots away on a stone road because someone else needs them more, and still walks straight." Her heart did something that she recognized as being entirely beyond her control. I don't have a wolf shift, she said. I have no title, no bloodline, nothing that would recommend me to your court. I'm the king, he said simply. I recommend who I choose. She thought of her grandmother's saying. She thought of the road from Dunmore, 42 miles of it, and what it had revealed. She thought of the note folded in her pocket beside the river stone. Then yes, she said, I'll stay. Epilogue. 1 year later. The road reveals who a person truly is. You need only watch how they walk it. The Royal Assembly procession was an annual occasion, and so it came around again, and Senna Vale, Royal Provincial Advisor, a title that had required a modest amendment to existing court protocol and had caused Lord Casveth Aldrath a documented episode of public sputtering, rode at the head of the procession. Not because she'd demanded it. Because Erevan had asked if she would, and she had said yes, and then spent a week wondering if she would feel like an imposter, and discovered, somewhere on the King's Road between Ethan Vale and the Vale Bridge, that she did not. She wore the grey wool cloak. She'd had it cleaned and mended, a careful repair along the left shoulder where the weave had frayed, but she had not replaced it. It was her mother's. It had walked every road with her. She saw no reason to leave it behind, simply because she was no longer walking in road dust. At the Vale Bridge, the procession stopped for water and rest, a change in protocol that Senna had quietly recommended, and Erevan had quietly implemented, so that it appeared in the official assembly guidance as simply, rest at the 3rd hour. She stood at the bridge rail and looked at the river Seth below, fast with the autumn rains just as it had been a year ago. She heard him come to stand beside her. You're looking at the water like you're reading it, he said. I'm looking at the road, she said, reflected in it. He had proposed 3 weeks ago, in the library where the conversation had first changed between them, and she had said yes with the same honesty she brought to everything, not swept away but genuinely certain, which was better. The announcement had gone to the court with the measured dignity Erevan did everything, and Lord Casveth had suffered what the physicians were carefully calling a prolonged episode of heart palpitations. Senna put her hand in her pocket. The river stone was there, smooth, oval, gray-white, worn by the current of the Vile River outside her grandmother's cottage. She had carried it since she was 7 years old. She took it out and turned it in her fingers, the familiar, cool weight of it. She would have liked you, she told Erevan, who was watching her with the reading look she had come to love. Tell me why. Because you stopped, Senna said. On the road, when it would have been easy not to. She looked at the stone in her hand, then closed her fingers around it. She always said the road reveals who a person truly is. She meant it as a test you had to pass. But I think she also meant it as a comfort, that the road doesn't lie. That if you watch carefully enough, you'll always see the truth. Erevan looked out at the river, then at the road behind and before them. Then he turned to her with the expression she had come to know better than any other face in the world, direct, honest, entirely present, entirely. And what does it reveal about you? He asked. She thought about 8 months of walking behind other people's carriages and standing straight anyway. She thought about bare feet on cold stone, and a pair of boots given away, and a note on royal paper and water rights legislation, and a library window and the long, beautiful road to a city she now called home. She thought about her grandmother, who had died in the spring and left her a cottage, a saying, and the understanding that the road only leads forward. Someone who finally walked the road she could actually see, she said. She slipped the river stone back into her pocket. Behind them, the procession waited, patient, attended, every servant seated comfortably, and the beech trees burned gold and copper in the autumn light, just as they had always done, and the river ran fast below the bridge that bore her name, and the road stretched south toward a city full of mourning. They walked it together. End.